Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. This Saturday afternoon, for the first time, Molly was in a good mood. And not because it was a day off. She had had quite a few days off in 3 years, and they were all like one another. This Saturday, Molly was leaving the Women's General Population Penitentiary. Before they left, several women who had also served their time with Molly were called to the warden's office. When they went into his office, an older, gray-haired man was already waiting for them. On his desk were small gifts for each prisoner who would be released today. The warden greeted them. "Do we have the day you've been waiting for? I hope you've learned the bitter lesson you've learned from life. Don't make past mistakes, and don't be tempted to make new ones, no matter how much you'd like to. And whoever suggested that you break the law, a good boss like me may never come across you again." And the man laughed heartily. Around his eyes gathered small, clean wrinkles that only good people have. "Thank you for your kind words, Thomas," Molly said. "I'll think 100 times now before I sign any document." As Molly approached the gate that separated the colony and the public street, she looked back at the prison windows once more. "I won't come back here again," she thought, and stepped into a life of freedom. Molly wasn't a murderer or a thief. She was just a loving wife and mother, and she was also very trusting of people. That's what ruined her, or rather, it was her husband, who didn't really care when Molly was accused of financial crime. Molly grew up in an intelligent, but poor family of teachers. Her father and mother instilled in her kindness, and that people should be trusted and helped. After graduating from high school and then from the economics department of the University of Finance, she continued to believe in the honesty and openness of people. In the course, Molly was loved not only by the teachers, but also by the students for her kind heart and the help she gave to those who fell behind. Molly always supported those who were weak and lonely. One such outsider was Frank, her future husband. Molly took a liking to him for his quiet disposition and intelligence. However, he already had a manicurist girlfriend from a prestigious beauty salon. She earned good money and constantly took Frank to places where he himself could not afford. Molly, on the other hand, simply enjoyed his friendship and had no pretensions to anything. Especially money to go to theaters and restaurants, she did not have. Upon graduation, those students who earned a red diploma and raised the prestige of their alma mater were assigned to prestigious companies. Molly was one of the lucky ones. "Here you are lucky," her classmates said enviously. "You'll make a lot of money." "But we didn't get any help at the dean's office." "Well," the girl answered them, "I did not run around in bars. I studied while you had fun." As they say, to each his due. That's when Frank made his choice between a manicurist and a leading specialist in a prestigious company. He chose Molly. The girl was glad. She liked Frank, and she even thought she was in love with him. The guy himself, barely out of university, got a job as a sales manager at an appliance store. The work brought Molly not only financial independence, but also a lot of practical experience. Competitors began to entice the young, promising economist to join them, offering better conditions and huge earnings. But she refused. One warm July evening, Frank and Molly were sitting on the terrace of a cozy little Italian restaurant. They were enjoying pasta, fruit, and wine. Live music was playing, and the whole atmosphere was inviting to daydream. "You know what, Frank," Molly said. "I decided to leave the company." "And who poached you? How many offers?" With curiosity, Frank asked. In his heart, he envied Molly, because he could not achieve even a tenth of what she had achieved through her tenacity and hard work. "No, I'm not moving to another firm." Molly smiled. "I want to open my own, where I'll be in charge and decide everything myself. I saved for the startup, and I want to borrow some more from the bank. You'll support me. I'm counting on us to work together." "Are you crazy?" Frank exclaimed. "How can you give up such a high-paying, prestigious job? How are you going to live? And on what? Come to your senses." Molly laughed. "Too late. I already quit my job and applied everywhere. I needed to start my own business. So congratulate me. I'm a young entrepreneur now, and I don't work for anyone else, only for myself." Frank sat there with his mouth open. He was discouraged that his girlfriend had lost her prestigious job and large earnings. The future became hazy. Frank, though a lazy man, remained very calculating. He was raised in a family where every penny was saved, denying himself everything. His parents saved a decent amount of money, which was then eaten up by inflation. This was a big blow to the young man who had hoped for their financial support. Now that Molly was left in such a precarious position, he realized that he would not get the financial support from her that he had before. In his heart, Frank was already regretting leaving that manicurist, that earnings, which at least were permanent. Ex-girlfriend did not have the stars from heaven like Molly, and he was much more relaxed then. Now Frank considered Molly. The adventurer was angry with her. Molly's company, meanwhile, was slowly gaining momentum and doubts. Guys began to dissipate. And then, 6 months later, there were already 10 people on her team. From the very beginning, the young businesswoman set up the work so that the firm began to give a small but stable income. The lion's share of the profits, so far, went to employees' salaries and taxes. But the businesswoman did not find out, because she knew perfectly well that she would not stop there, but would continue to develop her successful enterprise. Frank, though he was by Molly's side, was in no hurry to help her. It turned out that it took a lot of effort to earn a penny. Instead of helping his girlfriend, he went on to work in an appliance store. It was a job that suited him. He didn't have to work hard. The money kept coming in. Plus, he didn't have to worry, like Molly did for the whole company. But one day, Molly got a phone call in her office that turned her life upside down. "Hello. The secretary of the International Young Entrepreneurs Association is on the phone. Could you put Molly on the phone, please?" "I'm the one who answered Molly. 2 months ago, you applied for the Young Entrepreneurship Competition. I want to congratulate you. You were one of the 3 finalists in the competition and won a grant of 10 million. The entire amount will be transferred to the account you specified, tax deducted." "What a pleasant surprise," Molly exclaimed. "I already forgotten I was in that contest. Thank you." She was happy and immediately called Frank to tell them of her success. That evening, they celebrated the company winning the contest and continuing to grow with government support. Now some of the issues that Molly had long been unable to resolve were themselves surmountable. The young people were sitting at their favorite spot on the terrace of a small Italian restaurant overlooking the picturesque river. It was evening, and the birds were singing. Molly's mood was high. Suddenly, Frank held out a small pink box to Molly. Quietly, he said to her, "Will you be my wife? You're the person I want to share the rest of my life with. What do you say?" Molly froze in surprise. She hadn't expected such an outcome. This day had been full of happy events. "I agree," with trepidation, the girl answered. That evening, Frank and Molly showed so much dessert, drank so many cocktails that they had never tasted in their entire lives. These gifts went to the restaurant guests who were lucky enough to witness the birth of a new family. Just 2 months later, Molly and Frank were married. The wedding was a modest one. Only family and friends were invited. Molly didn't want pomp and circumstance, as some brides like to do. All the extra money went to develop the company. Even when Molly became pregnant, she never let go of the reins of the company. And only when the machine was born did Molly awaken such strong maternal feelings that she, without thinking twice, put Frank in charge of the company, which already had 150 employees at the time. The company itself brought in hundreds of $1 million a year in revenue. One day, after leaving her 3-year-old Maria with a babysitter, Molly finally visited the office. She noticed that the employees were looking at her funny. "What's wrong?" Molly asked her secretary. "Why is everyone so tense?" "Molly, didn't you know that we had an inspection 3 days ago?" "What inspection?" Molly was surprised. All the paperwork was checked by the prosecutor's office and the tax office. They said that our company did not pay any taxes and that someone could go to jail. Molly was surprised by this fact and by the fact that Frank had not told her anything. She went straight to the chief accountant's office. "What is going on?" she asked the employee. "Tell me." "There was an audit, and these people said that we weren't paying taxes in full. But I sent invoices to pay Frank. Everything was supposed to be in order. I don't understand anything." But Molly understood everything perfectly, that everything was not all right at all. If the company was of interest to the authorities, Frank told Molly to her husband, "Why didn't you report that we owe tax payments? Are you cheating on your taxes?" "It's no big deal," the man replied. "We'll pay it later. And I invested the money in a new business. We're going to sell luxury appliances. I bought a shipment from China." "You're crazy," said Molly. "You could go to jail for that. You can't steal from the state. How much do we owe?" When Molly heard the amount that has accumulated over 2 years, she was shocked. That money couldn't be raised in months, or the company would have to be sold. Molly didn't have time to pay the amount due and went to jail. The young woman desperately fought for her freedom. But not even the most seasoned lawyers helped. Duty is duty, but prison was not the real grief that awaited her. One evening, she was summoned by the warden of the colony. "Sit down, Molly," in a quiet voice, he said. "You know, I have some news I'd rather not tell you, but you should know it." "What's wrong?" In a trembling voice, Molly asked. "Just that he was driving with his daughter from a visit. There was a heavy downpour and the car skidded. Your husband lost control, and the car slid into the river. They pulled him out dead. His body is in the morgue. The girl, on the other hand, has not been found. My sincere condolences." "Hold on. You don't have to go to work tomorrow." Molly was deeply shocked by these words. She got up, walked as if in a fog to the door, and lost consciousness. She did not wake up until the next day. She had a severe headache from the blow. She couldn't eat or drink, and kept crying and remembering her little girl who had been left motherless through her husband's fault, and who was now dead. Everyone said a 3-year-old couldn't swim out of a cold fall river. It's unrealistic. Even the investigators who went to see Molly said that her daughter was probably dead, and the case would be closed. Along with the family, Molly's soul died as well. It was as if she had aged 10 years. Everyone in the cell pitied her because she could not even get to her husband's funeral and went in search of her daughter. It wasn't until 2 years later that the pain of loss slowly dulled, and Molly worked like a beast to dull the grief. They exceeded the plan many times over. Because of this, instead of the 4 years she was supposed to serve, she served only 3. And now she was being released on parole. Once outside the gates of the penal colony, Molly realized that, in general, she had nowhere to go. The house confiscated. No family. Molly's parents were no longer alive, but there was still the old house where they used to live. Then, yes, you decided to head out. A young woman, but first she wanted to find her husband's grave. Somehow, after reaching the cemetery, Molly turned on a narrow path that led to a small cemetery birch grove. There was the burial place of her husband's family. Beyond the fence were 3 graves of her father, her mother, and their son Frank. "So here I am. I brought your favorite cottage cheese horns." Molly put the treat by the monument right on the ground. "What have you done? I couldn't leave you unattended at all. And our favorite girl is gone." Molly noticed that there were flowers growing on Frank's grave. So someone is taking care of him. This surprised her. After all, he had no one else but his wife, and with distant relatives, their family did not communicate. Molly sat at the grave until late in the evening, and when it got dark, the caretaker of the cemetery asked her to leave. "Come back tomorrow. Darkness is not supposed to sit. Do not take the idea of the soul of the deceased. Do not take the sin on your soul," said her grandfather, "and go home." "Excuse me," Molly said. "I've been up too long, haven't I? I'll come back tomorrow." Molly herself did not notice how the sun went down. Once again apologizing, she went to her parents' old house. Molly's ancestral home was not welcomed by the terrace and the front door, overgrown. So to make her way to the doors and find the key hidden under the threshold, she had to pull the weeds. Molly had no gloves. She tore the grass with her bare hands. The leaves of the plant burned her hands mercilessly, but she felt no pain as her heart tore with grief. Finally, she entered her home. The home environment calmed Molly down a bit. It had been a long time since she had taken care of household chores, so she felt good about putting things in order. For a while, she forgot about her sadness and immersed herself in household chores. Molly went to her husband's grave every day. The caretaker already knew her by sight and greeted her each time as a good acquaintance. So today Molly, taking a bouquet of meadow flowers and a bottle of water, went to the cemetery. When she arrived at the grave, she placed an old jug on the pedestal of the monument, filled the vessel with water, and dipped a bouquet of daisies and bells into it. It turned out beautiful and pretty and simple. She sat down on the bench next to the monument and wondered, how long had she sat like that? Molly couldn't remember, but she was pulled out of her sad thoughts by a child's whisper, which made Molly's soul freeze with horror. Don't wait. You won't wait for him anyway. You'll only miss him. Don't listen to him. You won't hear him anyway. Don't run after him. You won't catch up. What is it? Guess what? Asked a quiet child's voice. It seemed to Molly that this child's whisper she heard only in her head. The young woman was afraid that she was slowly going mad. And then a wild thought occurred to her. After all, she was in a cemetery. Maybe the spirits were talking to her, but why with a child's voice? Molly was reminded of Maria, who also loved riddles. Her daughter was a smart girl and started talking early. By the age of 3, she was already good at distinguishing letters, so Molly wanted to enroll the talented girl in a school that accepted children from the age of 5. Molly had many plans for Maria, but they were not destined to come true. She knew the answer to this riddle because she herself had read it to her daughter, and it made her scared. The woman closed her eyes and time resolved. The correct answer was time. Molly answered in a trembling voice and turned carefully. For a split second, she allowed herself to dream that behind her stood her young daughter, who should have been 6 by now. Her heart, the woman's, was beating like mad, ready to burst out of her chest. It seemed that just a little longer and Molly would faint from the intense tension. Her nerves were strung like strings, and what was her surprise when she found the boy in front of her? It was an ordinary little boy, about 10 years old, as there are many running around in her yard. He was dressed in nightgown jeans and an old sweatshirt, and his grimy face radiated a smile. "Hello." The mysterious boy turned to Molly. "Have you been sitting here long? I saw you yesterday and the day before yesterday too." "Hello, it's been a long time. And how did you come to be here? You know there's a cemetery here. You gave me a fright." Molly answered and smiled at the child. "I'm sorry," the little boy answered. "I just wanted to give you a riddle. You said it correctly. The other people who come here can't guess it, but you could. Yes, I know people are buried here. Aren't you afraid to come here?" Molly was surprised at his answer. "No, my mom used to say you should be afraid of the living. And those who are dead already sleep eternal sleep," as if they were talking about ordinary things. The little philosopher answered. From such an exhaustive and wise answer, Molly almost opened her mouth in surprise. "What is your name?" she asked. "And why do you walk around here?" "Alone? My name is Kevin," the boy answered. "I often walk here. I take candy from the tables, and I go with my little sister. And then we drink tea together." Apparently, the boy was pleased that someone was talking to him as an adult and even got interested in his riddle. This was confirmed by his ear-to-ear smile. "Would you like a chocolate bar?" Molly asked. "It's from home, not from the grave. Did you know you can't take treats from graves? Didn't your mother tell you?" "No, I hadn't heard that." The smile slid off Kevin's face. "My dad doesn't know about it. Mom died 4 years ago." "I'm sorry, please," Molly flustered, terrified that he had hurt the child. "Why do they let you walk here?" "I go here to see Mum and carry flowers," Kevin answered. "Actually, we don't live far from here, but I have to go. My little sister's home alone." She's the one who taught me the riddle I gave you. Dad will probably be looking for me." "Wait, how old is your sister?" Molly asked, and her heart raced with a sudden premonition. 5 or 6, I think. The boy concluded businesslike. "Don't you know exactly how old your sister is?" Molly asked. "No, I don't. And no one knows," the boy answered. "She's only been with us for 3 years." "How 3 years?" Molly exclaimed, and her breath was taken away with excitement. "It's very simple. Her daddy brought her home and said she was his daughter." "Can you show me this girl?" Begrudgingly, she asked. "Of course I can." The boy nodded affirmatively. "Come and visit us. But don't be afraid of anything." "Why should I be afraid?" "Be careful," Molly asked. "You'll see for yourself," Kevin said, and went home inviting her. Molly got up, said goodbye to her husband, and followed him home. She was haunted by vague doubts and even fear. It was all too strange, incomprehensible, but it was as if someone's invisible hand was pushing her onto the path that Kevin was walking briskly on. Molly thought, even worse than her current life. Nothing would happen to her anymore, and she trusted. Kevin walked and chatted about something of his own, but Molly did not listen to his words, as if the bullets flew past her ears and did not touch her mind, which was close to her beloved daughter Maria. Molly was walking mechanically and was afraid of something. Perhaps that she would find another girl instead of her baby girl, or that Kevin would turn out to be a fantasist, and there really was no girl. They descended the mountain, and the path took them to the clearing. Molly became uncomfortable. She appeared. The woman didn't understand how anyone could have settled in such a wooded wilderness. "What about the school, the kindergarten? How long have you lived here?" Molly asked. "Always lived cheerfully," Kevin answered. "Did your little sister get used to your house right away?" Molly asked cautiously. "No, not at first. At first she was afraid to come and live with us, and she cried a lot. She kept talking about some rich house and different cars, and about her father and mother, who had been taken away. But she was 3 years old, so we thought she was making it up." "And what's your little sister's name?" With trepidation, Molly asked. "Kathy," shortly answered the boy. "Is that what she said?" asked the poor mother, a heart that was about to burst into pieces. "No, that's what her father called her. That was his grandmother's name." "Did she say what her name was?" Hope grew in Molly's soul with every step she took. At first she thought that Kevin and his father and little sister lived in some little cabin in the woods that Molly had seen before in the movies. The woman was surprised that the dwelling of this forest family turned out to be a well-cut house with supervised buildings, and you could hear the bleating of the goats and chickens. Molly realized that Kevin's father kept entire farms. As they approached the house, a bearded man of enormous height and a frown came out to meet them. "Hello," Molly turned politely. "A guest invited me to visit. Do you mind?" She waited for the man to say something back, but she was wrong. He remained silent and only regarded the woman attentively. Then he made a sign to Kevin. The boy nodded, as if he had understood him. He said hello. The boy explained cheerfully and ran into the house. It was only then that Molly realized that the master of the house was mute. Molly thought, "That's the kind of guy you'd be scared to see in a cemetery at night," but she said it out loud. "Kevin said you found the girl 3 years ago. I lost her. My husband died in a car accident, fell off a bridge into the Daughter River, and we never found her. I've been thinking about my Maria every day since then. Let me come in and see the little girl." He nodded and pointed to the front door. It did not take long to persuade her to come in. She scurried in, opened the door, and entered the room. The hut itself consisted of 2 rooms. One was small, like a nursery, with 2 cribs, and the other was huge, like a living room, with a dining table, flanked by 2 long benches covered with eyelids. There was a large stove in the room. Next to it was an outhouse where food was cooked, something like a small kitchen. In the children's room next to the wall of the stove with her back to Molly sat a little girl. The little girl had her neat pigtails braided, and she was humming something and playing with dolls. Molly's heart instantly squeezed. She recognized her daughter's voice, and barely able to stand on her feet from the excitement, she raised her voice. "Maria, my daughter, your mother is here." The singing stopped immediately. The girl turned around quickly, and Molly recognized her as her daughter. The long-suffering mother remembered every feature of her face, every birthmark of her baby girl. The girl glowed. She recognized the mother she had missed and dreamed of every day. "Mommy, you came for me," with a loud scream. Maria threw herself around Molly's neck. "Darling, darling," Molly exclaimed, and she fell silent. She could no longer speak. Her tears came down her throat, and she cried, and so did Maria, as only a child can grieve for his mother. During the day, there was another cry. It was Kevin sobbing. He suddenly realized that he, too, missed his mother very much, and now his beloved little sister was going to be taken away to that rich house she kept telling him about. Molly reached out to him and beckoned him to look at her. As a boy, he intuitively understood her. He threw himself into her arms, flooding her with tears, and Molly just sat there in the middle of the room, hugging the two children who had long ago become related to each other. Only a few minutes later, she noticed the boy's father standing in the doorway, watching this heartbreaking scene. His mustache was wet with tears, which he was furtively wiping away with the sleeve of his shirt. When Molly met his eyes, she thanked the man for saving her daughter. It was obvious here the girl loved Maria, was a clean, chowdered, and well-groomed girl. After calming down a bit, Molly looked around. Half the toys in the room consisted of dolls and bears. The little girl had a little pink closet full to the brim with colorful girls. Whose things? Apparently, the new father was not stingy with his adopted daughter. "Daddy said, baby, I'm not Kathy anymore. I'm Maria. I was afraid to tell you my name. I thought maybe you wouldn't like it, and you'd turn me away." The man waved his hands and shook his head. What did he mean by that? That it was all nonsense. With a gesture, he pointed at himself and then at Maria. That was what he was trying to say, that he loved the girl like her own daughter. "Will you take her now?" quietly asked Kevin. "Yes, I will," Molly answered. "Maria has a house where my parents lived. Of course, it is not the rich house in which she lived before, but it's livable." And Kevin cried. He was sorry to lose the beloved little sister he was so used to. Maria roared too. She ran up to him. Kevin hugged him tightly. "But I don't want to go to another house. I want to live here." Through increasing sobs, Maria said. Molly looked at the man in bewilderment. She did not know what to do. The landlord, on the other hand, pointed his index finger upward, which meant that Molly should wait a second. He grabbed a large notepad and pen and began to write. On the sheet appeared the words, "Stay here as long as you need, but I can't live here," Molly answered him. "We can't abuse your hospitality, and I have a job to look for. Besides, you don't know anything about me, but I can stay here for a while so Maria can get used to me again." And Kevin wasn't so bitter about parting. "And I'd also like to know her story. I think our conversation will be a long one." The man nodded and smiled. He was obviously glad Molly had decided to stay even for a little while longer. When all the excitement had subsided, Molly was finally able to look around. The decor of the house spoke of the owner's caring hand. It was immediately clear that a friendly and loving family lived here. The first thing she decided to do was to prepare dinner, while he worked outside and in the vegetable garden. Molly, along with her daughter and Kevin, did the baking. Kevin showed her where the eggs, milk, other groceries, and vegetables were. To Molly's surprise, the refrigerator was full to the brim. It was full of all sorts of things. The freezer was full of meat, minced meat, and frozen handmade dumplings. "Do you like pasta?" Molly asked the children. "What is it?" "We have toothpaste," answered Kevin. "We brush our teeth with it." "No," laughed the woman. "Pasta is an Italian dish made of long pasta and under plums." "Then we want that kind of pasta," said little Maria, and grabbed her hand tightly around her mother's skirt. "What's wrong?" Mom asked. "I am afraid that you will lose everything again, or that I will go somewhere else again," whispered the girl. "And I'm also afraid that I'm dreaming. But how do you know I'm not dreaming?" "Like this." Molly tickled Maria. The girl laughed and calmed down, finally letting go of her mother's skirt. When dinner was ready, Molly and the children went outside to find Kevin's father, but he was nowhere to be found. They went around the apple orchard and vegetable garden looking for the lost witch. Molly decided to ask Kevin the important thing that he had forgotten about with all the excitement. "Listen, Bone, what is your daddy's name?" Molly asked. "His name is Andrew." Shortly the boy answered. "Why can't he talk?" "He has been like that since birth," she went on asking. "No, he became like that the day my mom died." "Sadly," Kevin answered. "He just stopped talking. The doctors say it's nervous. They said it would go away, but it never does. He's so worried about it. It's so hard to live. Now he works as a forester, but before he used to take tourists to the mountains and different interesting natural places. Now he doesn't work, though he liked it a lot." Molly realized there was no point in asking the boy any more questions. He was too worried about his father, so she shut up so as not to spoil the child's mood. They found the master of the house in the workshop. The man wrote something in his notebook. Andrew calmly told him, "Molly, we never got to know each other. My name is Molly. What is your name?" "And I already know it, as you can see." "And we all made dinner together," Maria said. "It's called pasta, only it's not for the teeth. Don't worry, it's delicious." The man laughed. He laughed at Maria's words, and Molly was astonished at her daughter's words. She was shocked that the girl called Andrew her father, but Molly decided not to show her surprise. After all, Maria has lived with the man for 3 years. That's exactly the same amount of time she spent with her own father, who had so carelessly risked their daughter's life. In a way, Molly was still resentful of Frank because of what had happened to her baby girl. She suddenly wanted with all her heart to go to her husband's grave tomorrow and tell him about the miracle that had happened and to scold him a little. Molly and Maria went to set the table. Andrew and his son stayed in the workshop for a while. They needed to gather their tools. When they went into the living room, a great dinner was waiting for them. The tabletop and was set with the white tablecloth that Andrew's wife had used before. The table itself was replete with various appetizers. There were appetizingly written pastries and quickies, and in the center stood a large platter of flavorful smoky pasta. "How delicious did it all look!" Kevin exclaimed. "We haven't had a feast like this in a long time." "Really, Dad?" Dad smiled, nodded, and dragged his son quickly to wash his hands and change for the table. This little nuance did not escape Molly's gaze, who was pleased that her hard work was noticed and appreciated. While Andrew and Kevin were away, Molly put the pasta on the plate. An hour earlier, she had found candles and 2 old candelabras, which she had cleaned well from the troops' brew. So the holiday table was adorned with burning candles whose flames swayed merrily. Appearing a few minutes later, listed in a fresh shirt, the man no longer looked like the woodsman Molly had first seen outside the house. And Kevin was not a scruffy boy, but a neat and good-looking boy. Externally, father and son bore a great resemblance. So it was amusing for Molly to see how the little copy of Andrew had the same manners as he did. She smiled involuntarily. Andrew noticed this and stretched out in a smile as well. For the first time in 3 years, he felt warm at heart. If a stranger had walked in here now, he would have thought that the friendly family had gathered to celebrate some kind of holiday or a significant event. Everyone happily took in the food as well. Maria Kevin had trouble picking up the long spaghetti with a fork and sending it into her mouth. Molly had to teach the children how to eat pasta with a spoon, twist the long pasta and fork. The kids had fun repeating the trick. Looking at the kids, Andrew also took a spoon and began to coil ineptly. He decided to use a spoon, and then he spooned it out. Molly was amused by this. She took the pasta straight with her hands and sent it into her mouth. The kids laughed and repeated after her. Andrew did the same. These amusing actions loosened everyone up. The atmosphere was no longer tense, and Molly got the feeling that she had known Andrew Kevin for a long time. "A healthy dinner we made?" Maria asked Andrew. He nodded and gave a thumbs up, which meant super. Molly flinched again when her daughter called a stranger daddy. Andrew noticed this and patted her on the shoulder. It was his way of showing her not to worry about it. Molly smiled back, but still worried about how she would be able to tear her daughter away from the man she was deeply attached to. After dinner, the children went to play in their room while Andrew helped Molly clear the table and wash the dishes. She could never get used to the fact that a man could do the housework. Her husband never helped at home, considering it above his dignity. So from time to time, she had to use the help of a housekeeper. During the cleaning, the man mooed some kind of children's song. It was Molly begging. She thought Maria was very lucky to be here, to be in such kind and reliable hands. When things were finished, Andrew handed Molly a notebook with fine handwriting all over it. "What is it?" Molly asked. The man signaled for her to read the title page. The caption was, "The Story of a Daughter." Molly. It was nice that he considered Maria a kindred spirit. It made her feel warm and comfortable at the thought. Andrew pointed to her chair, signaling for Molly to sit down and start reading. She nodded her head to indicate that she understood. She wanted to know the details of Maria's arrival at the house more quickly, so she immersed herself in the notes. The longer Molly read, the more convinced she became that the story was confusing and shrouded in mystery. It turned out that Maria has no memory of how she ended up in the woods, but not my landlord remembered every detail. 3 years ago, Andrew was returning from work through the woods. He was in a big hurry to get home. It was late, and little Kevin was staying with a woman he knew who had agreed to watch him while his father was away. After his wife died, family friends helped Andrew in every way they could. By that time, he could no longer speak, so he moved with care. Andrew was always afraid that if he got into trouble in the evening, he would not be able to call for help. It was the ability to walk silently. It served him well that time. And so, as Andrew walked along the path near the river, he saw a car and 2 silhouettes on the bank, one large, the other small. He wondered, what could these people be doing at this late hour? A small child was heard crying, and an adult male voice was muttering something in response. Then the man pushed the car straight into the river for some reason. There was a big splash and the car went under the water. Andrew felt something was wrong and hid behind the bushes and watched what was happening. What he saw shocked him. The man took the small child by the hand and dragged him into the woods. The whole grove could hear the crying of the baby, who begged not to leave him and said he was scared. At this, the child called the man Daddy. Andrew cautiously followed them. When he realized that the man was going to leave his poor child in the woods and leave, he did not follow him, but stayed close by. He was shaken by what he saw. In addition, he was afraid that the man might return and hurt the baby. The child was very anxious, crying, sitting on the cold ground. So Andrew could wait no longer. We had to save him or he would get hypothermia, so as not to frighten the children. Andrew quietly cuckooed to distract the child from the cry, then rustled the bushes, and only then came out. Since the man could not speak, he began mooing a tune. The baby stopped crying and stared at the stranger. Andrew stepped closer. He realized it was a girl of about 3. He squatted down and began to show her figures, birds, and a bunny with his hands. The little girl wiped away her tears and looked intently at the man. "Are you a forest Santa?" she asked. "Came to save me." Andrew could not speak, but just smiled and nodded his head, pointing with his finger where to go. When he held out his hand, the little girl bravely put her little hand in it, either out of shock or fear, but the little girl still could not say her name. She sat down in the farthest corner of the house and sat there until Andrew woke up his son and gestured for him to talk to his guest. The girl was delighted when she saw Kevin. We had to arrange a late supper especially for her. The boy read the sandwiches. She repeated after him. The next day, they decided on a name. Andrew's grandmother's name was Kathy. It was also a name Andrew's wife, who had recently died, liked. At one time, she really wanted a daughter, but the child was not to be born. Kathy decided to keep it, so the man did not seek out the strange father, considering it a dangerous undertaking. The girl herself liked the name and was proud to wear it, but Andrew never got it out of his head. That terrible incident with the fuel truck and the crazy man who had left her own child in the woods. No amount of questioning helped to get the little girl to talk, so Andrew gave it up. Now he had 2 children. There was more to worry about, but it was all pleasant worries. And little by little, the pain of losing his wife began to wear off. He still could not speak, as if some force held his words in his throat, but the mute man learned to communicate with signs. The little Kathy, whom Andrew was devoted to, understood them and denied her everything. She turned out to be a clever and well-mannered girl, but a great dreamer. She told everyone that she used to live almost in a palace. She had servants, her own little horse, on which she rode. She also said that her mother disappeared, and her father stopped loving her, and brought a strange aunt into the house. The aunt was beautiful, but very mean. When Daddy wasn't looking, she would run. Kathy would push her painfully, pull her pigtails, and ruin her favorite toys. The little girl was very sorry that her favorite bunny, which her mother had given her, was left in the car. Then, in an outburst of emotion, Andrew brought a little white from the stable and handed him to the little girl. The girl's delight had no limits. She stopped worrying and, forgetting about everything, hugged the fluffy and cute bunny. Children are children. They only need the love and care of adults to be happy. So ended a long letter to Andrew about how a car came into his house. When Molly read it, she was in such a shock of despair that her hands were shaking. The woman was both angry at her husband and immensely grateful to Andrew, who, in fact, had saved her daughter. And Molly was even more grateful to that man, who looked like a devil, for not putting her in an orphanage. Apparently, Frank was counting on that, believing that when people found the child, they would send him to an orphanage right away. And by the time Molly got out of jail, Maria's trail would be lost. Molly could no longer cry. The tears instantly dried from the rage that raged in the woman's chest. Andrew came up behind her and put his hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her. He understood her feelings. At last, he was able to pour out his heart to someone, even on paper. A secret was weighing on him, and now he could share it with someone. But Andrew saw that he had eased his suffering. He had hurt another man. The man knew that the truth can be bitter, and so it simply had to be accepted. Molly turned, met his gaze full of sympathy and understanding. "How could he?" she asked. "I don't understand what could have happened. Who did I go to the grave then?" By the way, the woman decided to confess. "I want to tell you that I just got out of prison, where I got in because of this very man, who left our daughter alone in the woods at night. You might say he almost ruined her. Thank you for everything. You took care of Maria like family for 3 years. I owe you the rest of my life." Molly noticed that Andrew was writing something in his notebook. She read, "You don't owe me anything, but I would like Maria to remain my daughter. Tomorrow we will sort everything out. At least we'll try. You think I overdid it with the name Kathy." The young woman read the note and smiled. Even in such a critical situation, when there are cats on the soul, Andrew tried to joke and support her. Molly realized that a real man was standing in front of her, not the semblance of him that her husband was trying to pretend. She walked over and rested her head on his shoulder. He stroked her head and patted her back cheerfully with his palm. "Well, it's time to put the kids to bed, and they've already started themselves," Molly said. Andrew showed me where the spare pillow and blanket were, and he went into the yard to close the fence for the night and check to see if everything was all right. Half an hour later, the lights were out in the house, and the children reported peacefully. There was a silence in the house that is seldom seen in the city and was occasionally broken by the soft murmur of trees and the clatter of raindrops on the roof. Molly was about to fall into a deep and serene sleep for the first time in 3 years. Despite the trials of life and the horrible things she had to learn about today, she was happy for the first time in a while. She had found her living daughter and a good friend in Andrew. And Molly also definitely liked Kevin, who was that rare type of kid who understands everything as adults, but is still a kid. In the morning, Molly woke up in high spirits. The room was flooded with sunlight on a day of 4 walls, and the whole house exuded a cozy warmth. Molly found that the children had been up for some time. Their voices could be heard outside. She dressed quickly. She wanted to make a delicious breakfast, but to her surprise, she found a jug of goat's milk and sandwiches on the table. It was all neatly covered with a white towel. Could this be for me? Molly thought. The last time she had had breakfast, her mother had made it for her. It made her feel warm. She wondered what it was like to make breakfast for someone else. But it is not enough when you're alone. Molly felt with all her being that she was not alone now. There are people close to her who understand her. She ate breakfast, got ready in the house, and went out into the yard. There was real fun outside. The children were playing with a little goat that was trying to catch up with them. Andrew mooed and waved his hands, letting the kids know not to pick up the little goat. And the sly kids pretended not to see his rating signs. The little one switched to Molly's mom. "Did you see us playing?" shouted Maria, running up. "That little goat's name is Ben. He's our favorite. Do you know how funny he is? I can see his ears." Molly laughed. "And I fed the chickens. My daughter picked up on that." "You are good," said Molly. "And thank you for breakfast too." "Daddy made it," said Maria. Andrew stood nearby. "You know," Molly said to him, "I haven't been so calm in a long time. Thank you for caring. I feel like I'm back in my childhood, living with my grandmother." "Oh, of course, you're not a grandmother." The man got a laugh out of Molly's words, and he smiled. Andrew caught himself smiling a lot lately, and that was Molly's fault. He liked this woman more and more. She was finally able to get a good look at the manor. Not only was the house clean, but the fence walls as well. The floors were cleanly scrubbed and populated with age-old fabrics. It also smelled pleasantly of birch brooms and herbs that were sown in the shade. Molly noticed that the owner had homemade sushi, not for forest mushrooms and berries. In the barn, whole rows of fish listened and hung large thing from the cabinet and Ossetians. While looking at all this goodness, Andrew came up with a notebook. He wrote that he was engaged in the extraction of medicinal herbs, berries, and mushrooms, as well as digging meat of beasts to order. Most of the customers are wealthy people who have switched from store-bought food to natural food. So through this trade, the family had enough to feed themselves. In addition, Andrew was paid a forester's salary and a disability pension. At the end of the note, Andrew asked Molly to stay and live with them with his daughter, whom he considered his own. She was pleased that he cared about the future and offered to help where she worked and lived. People were ready to rip the last piece out of the other's throat and were waiting for her to make a mistake so they could stab her in the back, and they did. Molly stayed. The days fled quickly one by one. Molly was all preoccupation. Needed what for? Lots of stuff again. Helping with the winter preparations, doing laundry, cooking, and taking care of the children. To some, it might have seemed that the routine dragged her down and robbed her of her free time. But it didn't. Molly was happy to be around loved ones and to be needed. She was so used to her children and Andrew that she couldn't imagine how she had lived without them before. She also caught herself thinking that she began to watch Andrew more often. Molly blushed like a girl when he noticed her looking at him. Her heart fluttered and was ready to jump out of her chest. The young woman who had sworn not to let anyone else into her heart was, after all, in love. Only one thought overshadowed how her husband could do such a thing to his daughter: that she herself was a victim of his intrigues, going to jail. Molly already understood, but how could he have taken his most precious possession? Her negative thoughts were dispelled by Andrew, who told her she had to buy some groceries. Molly agreed. The next day, everyone had breakfast, got dressed, and loaded into the Neva, reaching the city. Molly asked to be dropped off near her parents' house, and then they arranged to meet at the mall. An hour later, when Molly walked into the house, she noticed that some things were out of place. She realized that her husband had been here. He was the only one who knew where the house key was. It turns out Frank was aware that Molly returned quickly, packing her papers, phone, and a few things in her backpack. Molly decided to stop at the store for some children's books. She did not have time to get there. On the way, she noticed a familiar car. It was her Mercedes, now driven by her dead husband. The car stopped outside the bank, and an imposing-looking man got out. In him, Molly recognized Frank. Hatred boiled up inside her. Now she wanted to deal with this bastard once and for all. Frank called out to her. The man didn't turn around, pretending not to hear. Though Molly realized he recognized her voice, the man increased his pace. "Frank, I'm coming for you," she shouted, "and I'm not backing down." Only then did he turn around. "I changed my name." "Why?" Molly asked. "It had to be that way," the dead man replied. Molly noticed that Frank looked frightened. "Molly, dear," whispered, "let's talk, but not here, but somewhere quiet." Molly realized that someone who does not officially exist, you can expect anything. And so I turned on the geolocation on my phone so that I could track her location if necessary. Molly got in the car. Frank drove her through some backyards on the outskirts of town. When they got there, Molly didn't even know where she was, so she discreetly pressed a button with a special app on her phone. Such a function. Even before the prison, she was hooked by the company's security service. She knew that after a while the police should arrive on the call. "Where is our daughter?" Molly asked. She didn't want him to know that Maria was found. "First of all, your daughter," the ex-husband answered. "Secondly, she is not my child." "How is that not your child?" Molly was shocked to hear her say that. "Are you out of your mind?" "I am not in my head." "Don't worry," coldly, Frank answered. "You know, Molly, I divorced you while you were in jail, and then I faked my death, changed my name. Now I have another wife. Or rather, not a wife, but a mistress. I'm not a fool to say that twice. And your girl is long ago in an orphanage, and the woman I live with found proof that Maria is not my daughter. I've seen the papers, see. It clearly says that I had mumps when I was 3 years old, and that means infertility. But the business is on me. You're the one who signed it. Before I died, I bequeathed the business to myself, only under a different name." "What kind of a scoundrel are you?" Molly screamed. "You would kill your own daughter for money and leave her in the woods. Maria is your daughter, and your mistress just wanted to get rid of the baby. What kind of fool would betray his own daughter?" Maria forgot her name in shock. "But I found her." After these words, Molly was hit hard in the face. Her head felt dizzy. The woman tried to get out of the car, but the doors were blocked. "As you understand, Molly, I will have to kill you." "You know too much," Frank hissed. "Both you and your degenerate will die." Frank drew his knife and swung, and for the chest. The woman mechanically closed her hand, and the knife hit her in the palm of her hand. She screamed and lost consciousness. When Molly opened her eyes, she saw the white ceiling and walls in front of her. The smell of medicine made it clear that she was in a hospital. "Doctor," she came to. A man's voice exclaimed. Someone was stroking her hair. "Is that you?" she asked quietly. I answered, "Andrew, how you feel?" As if I had been driven through like that. Molly smiled weakly. "But you surprised me more now." "What happened? Why are you talking?" "The doctor said that the shock had removed my inner barrier, and the dumbness is gone. And all thanks to you, or rather, to what happened to you. I was very afraid for you. When I got the call that there had been an attempt on your life, and you were unconscious in the hospital, I was so happy that you were talking to me," Molly cried. "I thought I would never see you or Maria or Kevin again." Molly, when I found out I might lose you, I almost died of excitement. Honey, I love you so much. I fell in love as soon as I saw you. Tears ran down Andrew's face, stingy, manly tears. He clenched and clenched his fists, too, from nervous tension. It's okay. Just part of my face hurts, Molly said, and stroked his head. You just don't worry, said Andrew. But I think you're going to get a black eye. And they both laughed. So the doctor said, you can go home now. You've got stitches in your arm, so come back tomorrow for a dressing. When Molly recovered, the lovers filed a registry office. And 2 weeks later, Frank was on trial. The prosecution asked for 10 years in prison for attempted murder. Leaving a minor in danger and shenanigans with Molly's business, her reputation as a person and businesswoman was cleared, and the company was rightfully hers again. As Frank was led away to his cell after the court verdict, he begged Molly's forgiveness and lamented that he had been so badly mistaken when he thought Maria was not his daughter. Lamented that he had almost killed his own child, but it was too late. Molly and Andrew's wedding was simple and fun. There was no fanfare and pompousness, as is customary for rich people, but a cozy, soulful celebration among the close people, friends and colleagues of Molly and Andrew. Everyone was more excited about the wedding of Maria and Kevin. Now they were truly brother and sister. Children proudly sat next to the bride and groom and amicably wondered why everyone was shouting bitter. The company business was taken care of. Molly was finally able to take the family on a honeymoon to the sea. The joy of the guys had no bounds. They ran along the beach and collected seashells. They watched them with doses and were genuinely surprised that the water in the sea is so salty. They shouted, "Look, there are dolphins." Molly and Andrew were sitting on the beach, hugging each other and happily watching the happy children playing on the beach. It seems to me, or rather someone is missing. Who? She wondered. I think the third one is not superfluous, said Andrew and pointed at the children. Molly said affectionately and looked at Andrew tenderly.